Chosen one, your recent action was so powerful that God released a miracle for you. This is not a coincidence. They didn't expect you to move like this, and that's exactly why everything changed. For the longest time, they watched you. They studied your patterns, predicted your reactions, and assumed they had you figured out. In their minds, you were easy to read, easy to doubt, easy to overlook, easy to talk about. But what they didn't realize is that something within you was shifting, quietly, powerfully, irreversibly. Chosen one, what you did wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. There was no announcement, no warning, no need for validation, and yet, it shook everything. You stopped explaining yourself. You stopped reacting. You stopped proving your worth to people who had already made up their minds about you, and in that silence, you became dangerous. Because silence confuses those who expected noise. It exposes those who relied on your response to feel powerful. The moment you pulled your energy back, their control disappeared. The conversations stopped. The assumptions collapsed. The criticism faded. Suddenly, the same people who had so much to say had nothing. Now they're watching differently, not with confidence, but with curiosity, with uncertainty, with a quiet realization that they may have underestimated you all along. This isn't just a phase, this is a shift, and what you've activated goes deeper than they can understand. You mastered the power of silence. What truly silenced them wasn't luck, timing, or coincidence. It was your decision to stop speaking where your energy was no longer respected. Before, they were used to your reactions. They expected explanations, defenses, emotions, something they could respond to, manipulate, or twist. Your voice gave them access, your reactions gave them relevance. And whether they admitted it or not, they depended on that connection to feel in control. But then you changed. You chose silence. Not the kind of silence that comes from weakness or fear, but the kind that comes from awareness. The kind that says, I see everything clearly now, and I no longer need to engage. That shift alone disrupted everything they thought they knew about you, because silence is powerful. It forces people to sit with their own thoughts. It removes the opportunity for drama. It cuts off the fuel that gossip, negativity, and control thrive on. And most importantly, it sends a message without saying a single word. You are no longer available for nonsense. At first, they didn't understand it. They waited for you to respond, to come back, to explain yourself like you used to. But when you didn't, confusion set in, then discomfort, then silence on their end. Because without your participation, the entire dynamic collapsed. You didn't argue. You didn't chase. You didn't correct every false narrative. You simply withdrew your energy, and that was louder than anything you could have said. Now, they're left to deal with the echo of their own words, their own actions, their own assumptions. And the truth is, your silence exposed more than your voice ever could. This wasn't you losing your voice. This was you finally realizing its value and choosing not to waste it. You stopped seeking validation. One of the biggest shifts, the one they never saw coming, was when you stopped needing their approval. At one point, whether you admit it or not, a part of you cared about how they saw you. You wanted to be understood. You wanted your intentions to be clear. You wanted your efforts to be recognized. And because of that, you explained yourself, overextended, and sometimes even shrank just to maintain peace. They got comfortable with that version of you. They knew you would try. They knew you would adjust. They knew deep down that your desire to be accepted gave them a certain level of influence over you. But then, something changed. You realized that validation from the wrong people is a trap. It keeps you performing, proving, and exhausting yourself for an audience that already decided how they want to see you. No matter what you did, it was never going to be enough. Not because you lacked value, but because they lacked the ability to recognize it. And the moment that truth clicked, you let go. You stopped over-explaining. You stopped trying to win people over. You stopped needing applause from those who never clapped for you. That decision, it shook everything. Because people who once felt powerful by withholding approval suddenly lost their leverage. They couldn't control you with silence anymore because you were no longer seeking their response. They couldn't manipulate your emotions because you were no longer performing for their validation. Now, they're left confused. They wonder why you're no longer trying, why you're no longer reacting, why their opinions don't seem to move you anymore. What they don't understand is simple. You finally approved of yourself, and when that happens, external validation becomes irrelevant. You detached without announcement. What truly unsettled them wasn't confrontation, it was your quiet exit. They expected a reaction, maybe an argument, maybe a long explanation, something dramatic they could respond to, analyze, or even use against you. That's what they were used to. That's what gave them a sense of control. But you didn't give them that. You didn't argue. You didn't explain. You didn't warn them. You simply detached, and that's what made it powerful. Because when someone walks away loudly, people focus on the noise. They pick apart the words, defend themselves, or shift the narrative. But when someone leaves in silence, there's nothing to grab onto. No closure, no final statement, just absence. And absence is loud in its own way. At first, they didn't take it seriously. They thought you'd come back. They assumed it was temporary, just another moment that would pass like before. But as time went on, reality started to sink in. You weren't coming back the same. You stopped reaching out. You stopped checking in. You stopped making yourself available. The access they once had to you, gone. And that's when it hit them. Because people often don't value what they have, they value what they lose. Your presence had become something they expected, something they assumed would always be there no matter how they treated you. But your detachment broke that illusion completely. Now, they're left with questions. Why did you leave so quietly? Why didn't you fight for it? Why don't you seem affected anymore? What they fail to realize is this: you didn't leave because you didn't care. You left because you finally cared about yourself more. And that kind of detachment doesn't need an announcement. It speaks for itself. You let your actions speak louder than words. What truly sealed their silence wasn't what you said, it was what you did. At one point, you may have tried to explain your intentions, defend your choices, or prove your worth through words. You gave people explanations they didn't deserve and clarity they didn't even value. But over time, you realize something powerful. People don't always believe what you say, they believe what you consistently show. So you stopped talking, and you started moving differently. You became more focused, more disciplined, more intentional. While they were busy discussing you, doubting you, or underestimating you, you were building, quietly, steadily, without needing an audience. And that's what caught them off guard. Because words can be ignored, words can be twisted, words can be debated, but results are undeniable. They started noticing the shift. The way you carry yourself now, the way you no longer seek attention but naturally command respect, the way your life is beginning to align, improve, and elevate without you announcing every step. And suddenly, the same people who once questioned you have nothing left to say, because your actions answered every doubt they had. You didn't argue with them, you outgrew them. You didn't prove them wrong with words, you proved them wrong with your progress. That's what makes it powerful. When your life becomes the evidence, there's no room for debate, no room for criticism that holds weight, no room for empty opinions to shake you. Now, they're left watching, not because you asked them to, but because they can't ignore what's happening. And the truth is, your consistency is louder than any explanation you could have given. You didn't need to convince anyone. You just needed to become, and that's exactly what you did. Outgrew the version of you they were comfortable with. What really made them go silent wasn't just your actions, it was the realization that they no longer recognize you. They were used to a certain version of you, the one who tolerated more than you should have, the one who stayed longer than necessary, the one who gave chances, explained yourself, and tried to keep things together even when it was draining you. That version of you was predictable, familiar, easy for them to understand and, in some ways, easy for them to take for granted. But growth changed that. You started setting boundaries. You started choosing peace over chaos. You started walking away from what no longer aligned with you. And suddenly, you became unfamiliar. You no longer respond the same way. You no longer entertain the same conversations. You no longer fit into the role they assigned to you. And that's uncomfortable for people. Because when you outgrow a version of yourself, you also outgrow the expectations others had of you. The dynamic shifts. The control they thought they had disappears. The access they once enjoyed becomes limited or completely gone. At first, they may try to pull you back. Subtle comments, old patterns, attempts to remind you of who you used to be, but it doesn't work anymore, because you've seen too much. You've learned too much. You've evolved beyond the version of yourself that accepted less than you deserved. Now, they don't know how to approach you. They can't predict you. They can't influence you the same way. They can't place you in the box they once kept you in. And instead of adjusting, many choose silence. Because your growth forces them to confront something they may not be ready to face, their own lack of growth. You didn't change to impress anyone. You changed because you refused to stay the same. And that evolution, it speaks louder than anything you could ever explain. You stopped reacting emotionally. What truly disarmed them, what made everything go quiet, was your decision to no longer react the way you used to. They were familiar with your emotions. They knew what triggered you, what got under your skin, and how to pull a response out of you. Whether it was frustration, anger, or even trying to defend yourself, your reactions gave them something to work with, because emotional reactions create openings. Openings for arguments, openings for manipulation, openings for them to feel like they still had influence over you. But then, you became still, not cold, not bitter, just controlled. You started observing instead of reacting. You gave yourself space before responding, and sometimes you chose not to respond at all. You realized that not everything deserves your energy, and more importantly, not everyone deserves access to your emotions. And that shift changed everything. Because when someone can no longer provoke you, they lose their power. The comments that once would have triggered you, you let them pass. The situations that once pulled you into drama, you stepped back. The people who expected a reaction, you gave them nothing, and nothing is powerful. At first, they may have tried harder, pushing buttons, testing boundaries, waiting for the old you to show up. But you didn't, and that's when it hit them. This version of you is different. You're no longer easy to read, no longer easy to disturb, no longer easy to control. Now, instead of chaos, there's calm. Instead of reaction, there's restraint. And that kind of composure is intimidating to people who once thrived off your emotional responses, because they can't figure you out anymore. And when people can't figure you out and can't control how you respond, the only thing left for them to do is fall silent. You didn't lose your emotions, you mastered them. You became comfortable being misunderstood. One of the most powerful things you did, the thing that truly silenced them, was accepting that not everyone will understand you, and being completely okay with that. Before, you may have tried to clarify everything. You wanted people to see your heart, your intentions, your truth. If someone misjudged you, you felt the need to correct it. If they misunderstood your actions, you tried to explain. You carried the weight of making sure everyone got you. And that's exhausting, because the truth is, some people don't misunderstand you by accident, they choose to. They see you through their own insecurities, biases, or limitations. And no matter how clearly you explain yourself, they will only hear what aligns with their perspective. At some point, you realize that. And instead of fighting to be understood, you let go. You stopped over-explaining. You stopped correcting every false assumption. You stopped shrinking yourself just to fit into someone else's understanding, and that's what made the difference. Because when you no longer feel the need to be understood, you become free. Free from opinions that don't serve you, free from narratives you didn't create, free from the pressure to constantly prove who you are. Now, people are left with their own interpretations, and for some, that's uncomfortable. They expected you to defend yourself. to clarify, to chase understanding. But you didn't. You allowed them to think whatever they want, while you continued to move forward, unbothered. And that silence, it speaks volumes, because it shows confidence. It shows self-awareness. It shows that your identity is no longer dependent on how others perceive you. Now they're left questioning, not just you, but their assumptions about you. And the truth is, your peace no longer requires their understanding. You don't need to be explained to be powerful. You focused on your own growth instead of their opinions. What truly shifted everything, what made them fall completely silent, was when you stopped watching them and started working on you. There was a time when their opinions mattered. Whether you admit it or not, you noticed what they said, how they reacted, and how they perceived you. It influenced your thoughts, your decisions, even your confidence at times. But then, something clicked. You realized that as long as you were focused on their opinions, you were distracted from your own evolution. So you made a decision. You redirected your energy. Instead of watching who supports you, you focused on becoming better. Instead of worrying about who doubts you, you focused on proving yourself right. Instead of reacting to noise, you committed to your growth. And that's when everything changed. Because growth is quiet, but its results are loud. While they were busy talking, analyzing, or forming opinions, you were building discipline. You were developing new habits. You were elevating your mindset. You were becoming a version of yourself that no longer needed validation or approval. And the truth is, people can argue with words, but they can't argue with transformation. They started noticing. The way you move now is different. The way you think is different. The way your life is aligning, it's different. And suddenly, their opinions don't carry the same weight they once did, because you're no longer operating at that level. Now, they're left watching from a distance, trying to understand how you grew past everything that once held you back. But what they don't see is this: your focus became your power. You stopped feeding distractions and started feeding your purpose. And when a person becomes fully focused on their own growth, the outside noise naturally fades. Not because it disappeared, but because it no longer matters. You started winning quietly. What truly sealed their silence, what made everything undeniable, was your decision to succeed without announcing it. Before, like most people, you may have felt the urge to share your progress, to show what you were doing, to let people know you were growing, improving, elevating. And there's nothing wrong with that, but you learned something deeper. Not everything needs to be seen to be powerful. So you moved differently. You stopped broadcasting every move. You stopped explaining your next step. You stopped giving people a preview of your growth. And instead, you worked in silence. While they were distracted, you were consistent. While they were talking, you were executing. While they were doubting, you were building something real. And that's what made it hit harder. Because when success is loud from the beginning, people feel invited into the process. They comment, criticize, compare, and sometimes even try to interfere. But when success is built quietly, it appears fully formed, unexpected, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. That's what happened with you. One day, they looked up, and everything was different. Your mindset stronger, your life more aligned, your presence more powerful. And the most shocking part, they didn't see it coming. No warnings, no updates, no signs they could track or predict, just results. Now, the same people who once had opinions are left with nothing but observation, because quiet success doesn't argue, it doesn't explain, it doesn't seek approval. It simply exists and forces people to adjust their perception without you saying a word. You didn't need to prove anything publicly. You just needed to become privately consistent. And now, your results are speaking in rooms your voice never had to enter. That's the power of winning quietly. It doesn't just impress people, it silences them. You closed the door for good. This is what truly ended everything. Not the silence, not the growth, not even the success. It was the moment you decided deep within yourself that you were done. Not temporarily, not emotionally, not out of frustration, but completely. Because there's a difference between stepping back and closing the door. And when you reached this point, something shifted that they could feel even without you saying a word. Before, there was always a chance. A chance you'd respond, a chance you'd return, a chance things could go back to how they were. And whether they admitted it or not, they relied on that possibility. But this time, there is no access, no reopening, no, maybe someday. You didn't just distance yourself, you detached with finality. And that's what made it real, because people can sense when you're unsure. They can feel when a door is slightly open. But when it's fully closed, when your energy no longer reaches for what's behind you, it creates a silence that cannot be negotiated with. Now, they're left with reality. No more chances to explain themselves. No more opportunities to reconnect on their terms. No more version of you that tolerates what you once did. And for many, that realization is heavy, because closure without conversation forces people to sit with their own actions. There's no final argument to defend themselves in, no last word to hold on to, just the truth. You've moved on, not in anger, not in bitterness, but in clarity, and that's what makes it powerful. You didn't close the door to hurt anyone. You closed it because you finally understood your worth, your peace, and your direction matter more than anything you left behind. This isn't the end of your story. It's the end of access to the old you. They didn't fall silent because you said something clever. They fell silent because you became something they couldn't control, predict, or understand anymore. Every shift you made, every boundary, every moment of silence, every decision to choose yourself built up to this version of you. A version that no longer seeks approval, no longer entertains chaos, and no longer looks back. And that's what makes your presence powerful now. You're not the same person they once knew. You don't move the same. You don't respond the same. You don't need the same. And deep down, they feel it. That's why the noise stopped. That's why the opinions faded. That's why everything around you got quiet. Because when you truly step into your power, distractions lose their voice. So don't question the silence. Don't feel the need to break it. And don't mistake it for absence. This silence, it's confirmation. Confirmation that you've outgrown what once held you back. Confirmation that you've stepped into a higher level of awareness and control. Confirmation that your energy is no longer accessible to just anyone. Keep moving the way you've been moving, focused, intentional, and unbothered, because this is only the beginning. And whatever comes next, it won't need an announcement either.